Non-stop Nut November. Nut, can you give me some nut sack? Nut, nice and warm nut. Nut, jar. These nuts in your mouth. Nut, give me your nuts.
There's squirrels in my hand!
Nut, have you ever ate stun seed? These nuts, nuts. Do you like your nuts crushed? Nuts. Nut. Big nut. Tasty nut. Nuts. Your nuts. Nut. Give me your nuts. Nut. I will call it stun seed. These nuts. Nut. Would you like me to put some of these nuts in your mouth? Nutella, and some nuts. We are now going to talk about nuts. Nut like every morning. Nuts in your mouth. Nuts. Tasty nuts. Nut milk. Nutty nuts. Nuts. Nut fan. Nuts. Amazing nuts. Tasty nuts.